Hello and welcome to Module 11. In this lecture, we will be looking at additional elements of fiction from the reading this week, which was Chapter 9 of Janet Burroway's Imaginative Writing. So, let's dig in. We did already cover some of this information in previous weeks, but we're going to review a few concepts before looking at some new ideas. Aristotle said a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that seems fairly obvious, right? But it's not always easy when you as the author has to answer questions like, where do I begin? How am I going to end this thing? And what the heck is going to happen in the middle? Remember how I discussed the difference between story and plot last week? This is relatively important in understanding how a story can become engaging or interesting. A story needs a plot in order for the reader to become fully engaged. To recap, a story is a series of events recorded in chronological order. Our example last week was the king died, then the queen died. A plot, on the other hand, has more to it. It is a series of events deliberately arranged so as to reveal dramatic, thematic, and emotional significance. The example I used was, the king died, and then the queen died of grief. Just those two words, of grief, lend to causality. We now have an emotional significance tied, in particular, to the queen's death. There is also an element of drama as to the order. The next thing we covered was scene and summary. Both of these are methods of treating time in fiction. A summary covers a relatively long period of time in a short space, while a scene deals in depth with a short period of time. The question becomes, how do we use both to their best advantage? In the video you just watched by Kurt Vonnegut, he opens with explaining how Cinderella is the most famous story of all time. And he is correct in that particular plot of Cinderella is used again and again and again. Let's take a look at how the story opens in one of the most famous versions of Cinderella and look at how much summary is included with just a hint of scene. Then we will look at why this is so. Summary helps us understand a character's background, understand a motive, alter the pace, create a transition. You can leap moments or years. Let's look at how this works in the opening of Cinderella. A rich man's wife became sick, and when she felt that her end was drawing near, she called her only daughter to her bedside and said, "Dear child, remain pious and good, and then our dear God will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." With this, she closed her eyes and died. The girl went out to her mother's grave every day and wept, and she remained pious and good. When winter came, the snow spread a white cloth over the grave, and when the spring sun had removed it again, the man took himself another wife. This wife brought 2 daughters into the house with her. They were beautiful, with fair faces, but evil and dark hearts. Times soon grew very bad for the poor stepchild. Here we have a leap of moments from when the rich man's wife becomes sick and she gives her daughter her dying instructions. And then we have a leap of a year from the time that she died, and the next year when the father has taken a new wife. For the most part, this is summary. We do have a glimpse of that scene of the mother on her deathbed where she says a bit of dialogue. This can be a great way to open a story. We can see examples of that not just in many fairy tales, but in many short stories as well. For example, last week's The Littlest Hitler starts with Davy giving us the summary of how he dressed up for Halloween. Scene is always necessary to fiction. Scene is to time what concrete details are to the senses. That is, it is the crucial means of allowing your reader to experience the story with the characters. So like we studied earlier in the semester, those concrete significant details, what they are to the senses, so scene is to time. Think of making a scene like a child having a tantrum. According to Jerome Stern, a writer uses their full complement of dialogue, physical reactions, gestures, smells, sounds, and thoughts when creating a scene. Let's consider again The Littlest Hitler, since we have all read it. In that story, we have a lot of different scenes where things are happening. We get to have the full range of dialogue, physical reactions, gestures, etc., etc. Notice how we have scene in the next part of Cinderella. Just before this, we've had a transition. Things have gotten pretty bad for the little girl, right? But then we have one particular day. One day it happened that the father was going to the fair, and he asked his two stepdaughters what he should bring back for them. "Beautiful dresses," said the one. "Pearls and jewels," said the other. "And you, Cinderella," he said, "what do you want?" "Father, break off for me the first twig that brushes against your hat on your way home." So he bought beautiful dresses, pearls, and jewels for his two stepdaughters. And on his way home, as he was riding through a green thicket, a hazel twig brushed against him and knocked off his hat. Then he broke off the twig and took it with him. Arriving home, he gave his stepdaughters the things they had asked for, and he gave Cinderella the twig from the hazel bush. Cinderella thanked him and went to her mother's grave and planted the branch on it, and she wept so much that her tears fell upon it and watered it. It grew and became a beautiful tree. There is a potential here of 3 scenes, maybe 4. The first is the father's conversation with his two stepdaughters and Cinderella. The second is when he breaks off a twig for his daughter. And the third, we see Cinderella planting the twig on her mother's grave, watering it with her tears. There are a lot of things happening here. We have dialogue in the first scene. We have 4 characters: the father, his two stepdaughters, and Cinderella. These scenes could be much bigger, more rounded, but it pretty much does what it needs to do. It's somewhat summary, but it also gives us a glimpse into the family and the personalities of the 4 characters. If we were filming this, it might be quite different. We might slow this scene down because it's very telling, right? But notice how in the final paragraph of this story, or at least on this page, we have transitioning of time again, and that's what summary does for us. There's no indication the twig grew into a tree in one moment, or maybe it did. Either way, we still have a transition of time. It is a movement that is pushing the story forward. The best thing about fiction is there are so many ways to write a short story. You could write a short story as a single scene without any summary at all, and it would totally work. You could write it in all dialogue, like the story you read for this week called Girl by Jamaica Kincaid. In that one, we hear only the mother's voice interrupted 2 times by the poor daughter who is just receiving this barrage of instructions from her mother. Another common and effective technique in fiction to orient readers is to start with a short summary, then move to a scene where the action begins. We see that in Hills Like White Elephants and also in the opening of The Littlest Hitler. We have this moment in The Littlest Hitler where he tells us how this one Halloween when he was 9, he dressed up as Hitler. It's more summary than scene. The first real big scene we get in that story is when he is on the school bus and he causes a stir. The crisis point of a story must always be manifested in action. Another way of saying this is that the crisis is always a scene. Think for just a moment. If you were reading a story and you were gripped by the blow-by-blow of a firefighter who is trying to rescue a child from a burning building, and at the moment of the crisis in the story he reaches a child and you're showing him dodging burning timbers and falling bricks and chimneys and all sorts of stuff, and then you just finish by saying, and then he got the child and they made it out safely. If you do that, you circumvent giving us the scene and leave the reader feeling cheated. At the moment the protagonist's situation will change, readers must be there. What is important about this crisis action is not that it be violent or even external, but that its intensity signal a turning point in the character's fortune or outlook. He will or will not make it out of the burning building alive. He will or will not rescue the child. Often the intensity of the moment will require that all the senses come into play. Imagine the smells in that burning building, all the heavy gear he was wearing that weighs him down, the wails of the child, the intense heat. All of these elements should be brought into your story. Burroway's chapter mentions both backstory and flashback. If you begin in media res, in the middle of the action, as so many modern stories do, then parts of your story will have to be brought in later. The firefighter might start in the middle of the action, but then the author might choose to return the character to an earlier time when it was calmer to give more explanation as to what they are doing in that burning building in the first place. He might be sitting in the fire station playing cards with a buddy when the alarm comes through. Backstory is a relatively new term that started out in the film industry, meaning a prequel, but has come to refer to any information about the past. Whatever occurred before the plot begins is necessary to make the story coherent. This information can be revealed through dialogue, or in the narrator's thoughts, or in the narrative itself. When the narrative actually travels back from its current location to depict the past in scenes, it's called a flashback. So we have two here. We have backstory, which is told in summary, and flashback, which is told in scene. And you learned some of this terminology in the camera angles assignment, if you remember. So a lot of the use of these terms comes about because we watch so many stories now instead of actually reading them. One other thing mentioned in Chapter 9 are the concepts of text and subtext. As a writer, you are always trying to mean more than you say. You want dialogue to convey information and character. You want setting to convey mood and propel the action. You want clothing to indicate personality and gesture to betray thought. The text is what is actually stated in any situation, but the subtext is whatever remains unstated, with the usual implication that the unstated is what's really going on. For example, let's go back to the firefighter. He rushes into a burning building and one of the other firefighters says, "John is always the first one in, isn't he?" But this other firefighter also rolls his eyes as he says it. So you know what the other firefighter says and his eye roll are in conflict with one another. What sounds like would be a positive attribute for John is being skewed by the subtext of that eye roll. The eye roll changes the meaning of the words and we can no longer take them at face value. The trick to subtext is not to worry about forcing it. The subtext is the portion that remains unstated, and good writers know their readers' minds need something to do. They want to feel like they are clever and can pick up on cues you are leaving, like the clues in a murder mystery. We can also see text and subtext at play in the short story Hills Like White Elephants. No one ever uses or speaks the word abortion, and yet that's what they are talking about, whether or not this young woman should have an abortion. The man claims they'll go back to being happy, and yet we as the readers begin to gather from the text that the woman isn't really convinced about this. When we read that story for the first time, and it clicks in your brain as to what they are talking about, you feel a satisfaction of having discovered something. Again, readers like having a puzzle to solve when reading. And I want to end with a really fascinating study that was done a few years ago where they tested what happens to the brain while we read. The subjects of the study were put in an MRI machine and connected to the electrodes and stuff. And they were laying on their backs, and so the people conducting the study would put portions of Harry Potter up on the ceiling so they could read specific scenes. And they read the scene where Harry plays Quidditch for the first time. And when the subject read the scene, the same parts of their brain lit up as if they were actually doing the actions instead of reading them. So when we read, especially fiction, our brains can't tell the difference between reality and words on paper. To your brain, it's the same as actually playing Quidditch. So really, we do what we read. Keep that in mind as you go forward into your next creative assignment. Good luck, and I'll see you next week.